Welcome to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where Peter Madison and David Sherrock discuss the complexities of adopting new ways of working at scale. Hello and welcome. It's wonderful to see everybody here today again. And I'm here with Dave and Suzanne. So it's a pleasure to have everybody. And so, Suzanne, would you like to give a brief introduction to yourself?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. My name is Suzanne El-Moursi. I'm the co-founder and CEO of BrightHive. BrightHive is an agentic platform for the enterprise data work. We are accelerating and excited to accelerate all of the different mountains and valleys and hills of data that we have in the world. Are excited by the fact that 90% of the world's data was produced in the last 2 years. And our platform mimics a fully end-to-end data team. When you think data scientists, data engineers, all the different nuanced sub-specializations of data engineering as a whole into 7 agents. Our 7 agentic AI agents are data agents that are not a wrapper on any singular LLM. And they work in unison to give enterprise work staff, employees, teams, just people, knowledge workers, a full data team in a box to help them break down and process from data to insights. That's us. We're a startup out of downtown Chicago. We've been around since 2018 and have always been obsessed with the data problem. Working with data is hard and it's time consuming. So wouldn't say that we're just, we were always a data company, but we believed in the power of AI. And we're already working on that kind of in the sandbox before ChatGPT showed up on our phones in November 2022. And it was really a stroke of luck for BrightHive at the time, because then we had conviction already around the potential of AI and specifically agentic. And that's when we rolled it out and became even more front and center in the marketplace for enterprise work.
So Suzanne, that sounds like that's an acceleration moment. You're literally like all the afterburners are on at that point because there's a lot of attention to it and new capability that came out as a result, or at least enhanced capabilities to what you were
Absolutely.
building. Yeah.
You hit it perfectly, Dave. Absolute acceleration moment, a stroke of luck, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
And we're meeting the moment head on. As I mentioned in 2018, our obsession with data work is hard. Just the on-ramp of working with data is hard. We all know it. We've worked in all different kinds of organizations and of varying sizes where you know that the answers in the data assets that the company has or that you have, whether you're in strategy, operations, finance, also cross-functional, you know that it's fragmented and siloed. You know it's hard to extract it. You often wonder on its cleanliness and usability, right? And what that has created over time is actually a complete bottleneck and a difficult on-ramp, right, for everybody in the company. Now, the other piece of data that we found is, on average, the median percentage of data professionals in the enterprise hovers around 3%. And the volume of data and data work that we have is multiples of 100x. So really, the data engineer to data work ratio is completely whack, right? And what we know is that business teams across any organization, McDonald's to Coca-Cola to whoever, right, rely on these central data teams of limited capacity, data engineers and such, so that they can actually get them to help unlock the insights in these data assets that span the enterprise. So when we did our research, we found, yes, business teams are frustrated. They kind of take a number and stand in the queue and wait to essentially be, picked up by the central data analysis teams. Very rarely do you find organizations actually, have data engineers in every function, right? They're usually central. And so therefore you've got a choking kind of situation where a lot of people, a lot of demand, very limited supply. And when we looked at, okay, this is interesting, there's an opportunity in that. So, we'll always have been trying to solve the very ugly problem, right, of accessing data in a more fluid model. We also found that when we step back, the entire marketplace of data tools, the modern data stack is like a double-edged sword, as I explain it. It's terrific in the number of innovations we have. We have phenomenal brands, right? Lake houses, warehouses, data tools, transformation, ETL. We know all of them. And therefore, you have innovation on very specific things and very specific tasks. But when you step back and put yourself from the non-technical point of view, it's a crowded marketplace, right? There's too much choice. And you want to invest in your data infrastructure as a business leader and as an IT leader. But again, too much choice. So when we looked at the marketplace, if you take the cost of tools alone, which is between 3 to 500K a year, 500,000 at least, and that's a medium-sized organization, right? And then you add the salaries of those data professionals, you're talking on the low end, somewhere between 1.2 to $1.3 million for about a team of 4 people and the tools that they need, to much higher than that as bigger, as the organization gets big. And so we kind of also saw, well, a lot of the organizations in the world, and if you just look at the United States alone, there's between 500 to 5,000 employees. That's 35,000 registered entities in that segment. And that's a $4.6 trillion TAM. Those folks don't have a modern data stack, haven't invested continually in their data infrastructure, right? But they would like to do that. So as we began to define the BrightHive value proposition, it centered around these 2 things, that we want to essentially make data work, all work, become data informed work, right? Meaning the work that's happening in the business units, in the business teams, how do we relieve kind of this bottleneck of access to trained professionals? You question a dashboard, you want to look at the field in the warehouse. As a business user, you don't have the tools and the knowledge to actually go into that infrastructure. So how do we open up and allow everyone to have that access to do the type of data analysis that informs their work and make it data informed work? And just think how powerful that becomes when anything you're proposing to your leadership or any task you want to, kind of question, or any next step you want to define, is evidence in the data that you have, and you can point to answers and you can point to that. But then secondly, we found that there's quite a bit of a market for the SMBs where with one buy, they're getting a full data stack from BrightHive, because our managed data stack gives you a data infrastructure. We need that so that our agents are very powerful, right? And of course, if you don't need that, you will be in our different deployment where you're taking our agentic layer on your stack. You don't need us to help you with Snowflake, for example. And that in itself made us composable. We were already solving the infrastructure piece. We were already solving the data collaboration and sharing piece. When the promise of AI became evident to society, that's when we knew our agents that were in the sandbox, we pushed them out fairly quickly between mid last year to where we are today. Literally now it would be a year, right? So then how do we create agents that mimic data tasks when also you're going to tool all the infrastructure that comes in?
So both Peter and I are listening. This is an area we both of us have a lot of interest in. So I think we're kind of just like absorbing everything that you're sharing. But what I wanted to do is just bring in a little bit around the teams. So again,
Sure.
we often talk about, well, we're seeing in the marketplace a lot of conversations about how AI is coming after, in the sort of the sloganeering of coming after certain jobs and so on. Data is this really interesting space because it's so technically driven that there's an obvious, like, really great proposition there. Can you maybe talk about a use case where the agents that you're using or you're offering work alongside existing data teams, and how that might work, and how is those teams training their replacements, or are they really empowering, enabling those teams to be able to get through a bigger backlog of requests? What are you seeing from the use cases that you're seeing when the agents are sitting alongside existing teams?
Without sharing customer, names, I'll tell you their use cases. I'll just tell you 2 separate things. So first of all, when we're being considered, we're a CIO, CTO, CDAO buy. So we're on the technical side of the house. So we are vetted very quickly early on as a tool that is going to be powerful, first of all. And like, how do you even do what you're saying? And when we try to figure out, so great, we check the box. So what are you trying to get out of us? And there's consistently 2 scenarios that they're asking and wondering if we can solve for. Number one, I'm a CIO with 1 data analyst. And the organization needs a lot of insights, not so much the data engineering, but just needs to refresh the dashboards. And it's exhausting, right? When we haven't been able to find the data analysts or we have them start and then they leave. So in this case, we want to have a self-servicing. And in fact, I'm stealing this from my client because he said that. He said, we're growing as an organization and I lead the data team. And we, support so many dashboards that across the business, from customer success, from marketing, procurement. This is a wearable in the healthcare category. And the reality of it is, I can't get enough people just to be able to help create the data pipelines, because you need the data pipelines and transformations so that these dashboards serve the business. And at this point, I'm not really sure we need dashboards at all. So is there a way for us to say this dashboard as of like last Friday, but with this tool, which is mimicking the skills that my data analysts have, with this tool, you can actually go to the source at any hour. You don't have to wait until a dashboard is updated, or you don't have to wait until we actually make a push. And the immediacy of the insight allows majority of the case studies that there are use cases they're being asked to support actually be self-serving within the organization.
Okay.
Relieving the load off of his analysts to do a whole lot of different planning and future scenarios because it's in a growth stage. Okay, and this is a privately held company. And so to us, we're like, okay, 80% of this work is just grunt data work, right? Those engineers that you take a while to find. And, let's remember that data scientists and data engineers in general and data analysts are hard to find and are expensive. So the value proposition, you're increasing headcount without increasing OpEx.
Yep.
You're removing the grunt work off of the few analysts that you have. You're utilizing them to meet the kind of the strategic agenda of growth planning and scenarios that are about the future of the business for growth into a 5-year out plan, but you're also not abandoning your responsibility to keep your business team completely plugged into the insights that they need, right? And when you're in the consumer space, as you know, anything consumer packaged goods or consumer electronics,
Yeah.
you are looking at things literally on a weekly and a monthly basis. A quarter is too far away, right?
Yeah.
And so that scenario of how does my limited team meet both the work that's necessary for future growth and business needs today?
Right.
Definitely not training anybody to take anyone's jobs. You're almost delegating 80% of the grunt work to almost, offshoring those. I mean, we did this. We offshored in the last decade to all the different places in the world, except now they're right here. You can monitor, the security of the agents. You can monitor the performance of the agent, and you can keep much more closer tab. The other scenario is actually very unique, and we're finding it pop up even a little bit more commonly than we realized, which is organizations that are large already, but through M&A. So think about all the data that comes from M&A and where does it live? So there's quite a bit of companies that just go through that. And now you have such fragmentation to essentially get, and usually they're PE, backed or PE purchased or, became off private from a public space. They have a 5-year trajectory and they need to be flipped. And the very first year is just figuring out all of the M&A that has happened. The most important asset is the data to be able to find all these synergies. They're not having enough people process all of that data, right? There's some stuff still on Tableau desktop for one of these customers that we're working with, right? So the aggregation, not even to get to the analytics level, but just to be able to do the pipelines and the infrastructure. And with it, they're considering where can we have cost optimizations on the tools? Because when you're purchasing from multiple places, you're acquiring the data in the environments that it's in. And so when you look at the streamlined efficiencies you need to do in your infrastructure alone so that you can move the rest of the data lifecycle, it comes down to, okay, we want the agentic layer, but then also what other bills can we sunset, like a 5 trend bill or, whichever one, because we're getting it part of the buy. So it's basically people and resources almost always.
So, and what I'm hearing you say there is that this is really an acceleration tool, or allowing the existing data engineers, data scientists, data analysts that an organization will have, but is effectively giving them more power because the routine or the grunt work gets taken care of, so they can
out of the box.
Thinking about the problems and crafting those problems in the right way.
Right.
What about interaction with, so one of the things that we recognize a lot of the time, so we talk all the time about And Peter, you're going to have to jump in at some point, otherwise I'm
Oh,
just going to
I'm
your
just
idea.
I'm listening. I mean, I do have some questions, but you're on a roll, so I'll let you go on.
So let me ask one more question, then Peter's going to get a go. But one of the things that we often see in an organization, we talk about getting value out of the door. I mean, from an agile DevOps perspective, it's very much about a learning cycle that allows us to deliver something, learn from it, bring it back, and so on. So
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
and in a business world, often they don't know how that all of that data's there. It's got tons of information, but they
Hmm.
don't know how necessarily to ask the questions
Right.
so that they get something coming out.
Right.
Again, any use cases around that, or what's your
Yeah.
experience?
Oh, absolutely. So first of all, let me just explain the agents themselves. So there are 7 agents. They're mimicking the phases of the data lifecycle. So now we're talking about quality data work. It doesn't matter what your title is as a person. This has to happen. Like governance. You must govern your data, especially if it's high PII. Our governance agent essentially guides the user to identify wherever PII may be, flashes it for the user, walks you through basically a workflow of, do you want to restrict this? Like, for example, social security and birth date, never together, right? So that's what we mean when we say we are agentifying the, mission critical tasks that have to happen to make sure that this is quality data work. And we're working at the metadata layer. We're doing that faster because we're giving you an agent that has been designed and engineered to do that, right? The business user doesn't know anything about governance, right? And so basically that guidance with still a human in the loop to
Mm.
get you through being able to govern the data. You could also be a technical person. Again, that's a delight because then it's click and you're
Yeah.
fine and it's done it for you. And then the same thing, when you think about one step before that, the ingestion agent, to be able to look at all the airbytes and the different sources, flat files, structured data, PDFs, unstructured, like all of it comes into one central place and essentially clean and create a schema and glossary, all of that part of it as well, right? Before you even get to the prompt. Why am I highlighting this? Well, the agents, they're artificial until they're not, until you teach them. And so guess what we get to brag about is that not all AI is equal, and our AI is pretty damn good because we clean and create all the plumbing for data pipelines to teach these agents that then help you answer the question. So you could answer a prompt, enter a prompt that isn't necessarily, the right way to ask the question. And so our agents are going to essentially respond back and become more insightful in their response because they're telling you perhaps you should be looking at X, which seems to have a better distribution or relevancy to your question and gives you a distribution with a visualization. So when you start with garbage and data, you don't get,
Yeah.
great outputs, right? So it starts from the data itself, the pipelines that make the agents more intelligent about the context, right? All your data is about context. We create that in our RAG. And then the engagement for you as the user, basically a graphical, user interface that is a agentic prompt language. And that's where we're investing more with the help of our agents themselves, right? How to write a prompt, how specific. Let's actually call the column, the header of the column in, table X and be very specific in that. Business users would have never had even the idea to do that, right? But guided by an agent with a human in the loop, it is both refining your prompt questioning and relieving much more insightful answers than the obvious answers, right? A VP of sales should know what was the biggest sale for them that quarter. That's not insightful, right? But how does it actually match up for the last 10 quarters and on what parameters and what price differentiation, what kind of discount had happened or hasn't happened? That becomes something possible because the agent can bring that forward and show it.
I liked one of the pieces you touched on there around the compliance aspect of it. So the ability to ensure that the compliance step gets done correctly. And
Right.
we worked in a lot of very heavily regulated organizations, a lot of them in financial services. And one of the big challenges we run into there is access to production data to do the data analytics in the first place, where
Right.
restrictions mean we can't access that data. But the
Right.
not being able to access that data means the analysis is largely meaningless because you can't have it both ways, right? So
Right.
have you run into that, or have you and your agents and your company helped deal with that type of sort of quandary in the past?
Yeah, well, so the fact that we've baked governance into the platform in our workflow, that it's not an afterthought. So, for example, we wouldn't be pulling any data that doesn't have a governance layer on it. because it is part of the steps of the workflow. You can't touch it in the old world because we don't know if governance has happened in the first place. So the scenario that you're painting, you just can't go grab data off the shelf or from the warehouse and be able to say, I'm going to use that. Compliance is going to be all over you. Who are you? Why are you touching this data? It's restricted on all of the pieces. So all these checks were happening by human beings, but they weren't necessarily controlled and policed by any specific software solution often. Or if they are in really big banks, too big, too fragmented, they cannot confirm it from one function to the next. Today, as our clients are, by the way, and none of their data comes to us, they're applying our agentic layer on their cloud, or they're doing the managed data stack. So we are able to show, because we have the governance agent, that actually has happened. And here's what we're extracting. Also, we work off of the metadata, right? And when they want to take the raw data in, they get to see that none of the data is on our cloud or in our hands, right? So we really separate the church and state, and we show that we've identified the most important steps, which is making sure that governance was applied. And then the system is able to show, and then just think about being within the same different functions within the same company, or being multiple organizations as data partners. So then you're able to say, restrict Peter, who's in a different unit or in a different organization, from seeing these two things together. The system doesn't even show it at all. And that policing is what makes business leaders actually say, wow, that in itself is a huge business concern that we didn't actually always fine tune and tool in a way that we ensure that it happens all the time.
Yeah,
so this is an example of where you apply agentic AI, and it's actually much better results than human beings.
Because it is a common problem we see. One of the other pieces, and you were sort of touching on it there too, is that fragmentation, which happens also in large organizations across data teams, where each of those data functions exists within its own silo with its own VP. And so then they don't talk across each other. So trying to move the overall data strategy forward becomes very difficult because there isn't one.
Yes, energy companies, our energy sector, and we're going into it more, they're also really old, like the utilities. They haven't invested there, and they know that. They're saying we're actually making infrastructures investments today. But that's about over the next 5 to 7 years. I can't wait to unlock my insights when my infrastructure, because they also, grew through M&A themselves, local utilities that get bought up by the bigger utility all over the US, different states, different regulation as well. And so they often will come to us and say, how can I activate this layer, which is data, while I am making some of these infrastructure, but they won't be in time for me to figure out, for example, my pricing strategy when there's, it's a very regulated industry, and what should I be doing? And so we also see that in the really legacy industry too. It gets overwhelming between all the different layers of the cake, as I said, from the infrastructure to the tooling to the people to the fragmentation. The fragmentation, to me, I just feel like we are exploring the moon and Mars, and we have EVs, and we still don't know. I can't get these things to come together, because my last name El-Moursi has a hyphen. I have it in this system. I don't have it in that system. We see this a lot in our higher education universities. One of our customers wants to do a 360 view of the student. Oh my God. Your financial aid data is different from the grades that you got, from basically your wellness, students. There's all kinds of services are offered to students. There is no singular way, and they're all great SaaS, right? And then the content in Blackboard for the courses that you took. Now, why does that matter to the university? Because everybody's trying to activate their alumni community, right? But how do you activate them when they became an alumni, when you did such a poor job knowing their student experience and have a 360 view of the student? So our very first higher education account that came on a few years ago had 300 different areas where they were pulling data from. If you were athletics and you played the sports, so just kind of how did you come into the university with your performance? What happened when you threw out? It's so much nuance and opportunity in the fragmentation, problem.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'm somewhat familiar with that one.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places that data can come from, and trying. I was actually one of the things I was going to ask next around if you're bringing all that data in, then standardizing it to a common model so you can start to draw insights off it is obviously a key aspect of that. So that's your ETL type loads or the variants of that, to say, depending on what order you're going to look at doing that in, to actually start to standardize what the data looks like, so you can start to bring those insights to the forefront.
Totally. This customer that I'm mentioning in the higher ed space, the very first set of data they were 167 tables. We found 16 of them are empty. So it's like, why is it on your list? Did you know that you have nothing in these tables? So just quickly to do discovery. And it's
Yeah.
like, no, I actually didn't. And I was like, hey, I'm just being funny. This is not a trick question, but actually, you have these tables that are empty. So let's just remove that.
Yeah.
You know, that discovery even. What's here? What's in my sandbox? And before I became an entrepreneur, I spent 16 years in big corporate, GE Healthcare, IBM, and with IBM Global Services back in the day in the mid 90s with the birth of the @ sign. All of our customers were hiring IBM Global Services to deploy the WWW called the internet, right? Because in the mid 90s, the internet was the biggest thing and a lot of business transformation. So I remember being, in Bank of America, I remember being at State Farm, 27 years ago, trying to adopt the internet and do things like online banking, homeowners
Yeah.
insurance policy, but the data is in Linux and mainframe and it's terrible. Pretty much it was better to do everything from the beginning from a clean slate. And that was a lot of investment, a lot of time. So I think about that and say, wow, there's still a lot of places where you just can't get a clean cut, and then apply it to the AI and be happy with the outcome. But remember, it is artificial intelligence. It is artificial. So you give it junk data, it continues to be artificial. Don't be upset with the bots.
Reflecting on some of the conversation we were having just before we hit record. And
Yep.
one of those being, you introduced BrightHive as really helping organizations make lots and lots of data-driven decisions. It's partly a data problem, partly a technical problem, but it's also a huge cultural challenge
True.
because a lot of leaders, even if they say they want to see data, there's this huge like kind of gut feel, intuition, understanding, or experience that they bring to the table, which often conflicts with that. How are you seeing that sort of cultural shift? How is it facilitated with the BrightHive and what you have there? But what do you see in that cultural change? Is it shifting? What's driving that change?
Absolutely. So first of all, we make a great effort to educate whoever came to our website and decided to book a demo. Why are you interested in BrightHive? And they'll tell us all the things, cost cutting, tools, whatever. And let me tell you about BrightHive, our vision. Suzanne sees a world where everybody in the organization is a much more knowledgeable worker, and the work that they do is actually much more data informed. In fact, I have been on every podcast arguing I am going to start a KPI called delight. Is my job more delightful? Can we start measuring this as we're pushing AI to the workforce and the change that's happening? Because in my opinion, if my boss, and they did, right? Like I'm literally 47 today. So think 30 years ago, like you're going to have to use this tool. That's it. That's how we're doing it here. I took it on. I couldn't complain. I had to learn it. Usually, the old systems were very difficult. The UI sucked. And I did it. So to me, I feel that workers should be front and center to tell us on the delight of their jobs. And so why does that matter? Because I want Peter to think about his very first thing in the morning is to go into BrightHive. And what in the future, what will he see? Well, the hive, from our perspective, is a representation of his company, the culture. And if BrightHive is deployed enterprise-wide, and it is your agentic layer in your firm's architecture, and this agentic layer is 7 agents that work in unison to act as your data team. If Peter is being asked to create a memo or to, within the next hour, bring back an answer, he knows he has what he needs. He has both his data assets and he has his data team in a box. And Peter can get on BrightHive and be able to point whatever he's looking for, whether it's the Google Analytics data, whether it's a Salesforce. We connect 350 plus connectors, plus take straight flat files, PDFs, Excel spreadsheets. He loads what he needs and he creates a project, a workspace, and then works with the agents to figure out the answers that he may need, then push him into a PowerPoint slide, push it into whatever he wants. What just happened is to service Peter. These agents are not sitting out here doing something. They need to be told, help me find an answer to this question. Help me find write the next data strategy, whatever it is. And I believe that Peter gets to say if that was a worthwhile use of his time and did it actually propel him further in his work and make his knowledge work actually be a lot more data informed. So in the future, we want people across the organization. We share this with whoever came to knock on our door to get a demo. What is your future vision for your workforce as they adopt BrightHive across the enterprise? Because that's what we empower. We empower that 97% that I mentioned to you is not part of the central data teams. We're empowering those folks. The 97% of smart people that are in procurement and customer success and in finance who have really important tasks, but they do have a dependency on the data assets that the firm has. If we empower them with a full stack that is an agentic layer protected in your cloud and the prompt engineering tools and tips, and they're able to unlock insights faster for the servicing of their roles and their organizations in a whole, that culture will show up in the hive. Because when you you log into your hive and you see it, what I want to see, what I'm showing you is that every microcosm in the organization, regardless of what function or unit they're in, what they revealed as insights, because you check it and you share it across the organization. And that's our hope, is that the page where the hive exists is a representation of a more data mature, data informed, data driven type of workforce.
And you just got to hope that it isn't the person who says that, well, you've shown me the data, but it doesn't prove what I want to say, so I'm not going to believe it. But that's the
Yes, there will be that. There has to be a wave of that. People are going, if this all materializes, the growing pains out of this, the naysayers and non-believers, they have to realize, yes, we are at a point where we are going back and analyzing and making progress on that debt, right? That's exactly the point. If 90% of the world's data was produced in the last 24 months, we do have a capacity issue. We do have a lot of people that are going to not, today, they don't even trust the dashboards. They don't know when was the last relevant update to the data. 100%, and that's going to continue. But I think that gap starts to close when we're showing the performance of the tools, when we're showing that you're still in control, when we're measuring your productivity by, and delight. All of these things in the future should move us towards more conviction around what we have to work with. And if we don't, then we didn't, right? I mean, that's the bet we're making on AI. Then we didn't. But we made a bet on the internet, and look where we are today. You can't live without your smartphone. You can't live without your Google Maps. Imagine MapQuest back in the day. You
imagine
can't.
physical map.
MapQuest. I'm remembering paper maps when you got to
Remember the paper maps,
navigate
right?
that way.
When I came to the United States from Egypt, you have to map some paper all the time.
Can I know we're going to run out of time shortly, and Peter's going to jump in and talk about the three takeaways in just a second.
Yep.
You mentioned the KPI of delight in an organization. Have you taken that to the point where you know what the definition of the delight KPI is?
Not yet, but that is something that I would like to do. My intention is to invite all of these early customers that are bringing an agentic data team in a box. That's what we are, agentic data team in a box, and rolling it out and showing people that they're being given the autonomy to work with their data sets right there. They have them on their laptops, they have them in the cloud, right? And be able to share the insights that you have. Our goal is that anybody in IT and the business or two business units to have a different kind of conversation together because they're meeting all the time. So I believe that as part of that measurement is that we're helping influence the conversations that are happening in the enterprise between marketing and sales, between finance and ops, between customer success and procurement, whatever it is, right? Because they each have a set of data, they have a set of the story, they have a slice of the pie. Bring them together. Your data is great. My data is great. Together, we're powerful. Let's create powerful. BrightHive is a pathway to that. Now, and let's measure along the path what that does for the enterprise and the culture and the people dynamics. And so to me, I would define it around these things, but you also want the business leaders to have that buy-in and bring it in and define it from their own organizations. For us here at BrightHive, we have coming up on the summer, so we're getting some really amazing MBA students for 12 weeks. These are students from University of Chicago Booth. When you look at the resume, they're all coming from Bain and McKinsey. They are at their Ivy Leagues or Cornell and otherwise. They're from all over the world, right? And we know what happened when they went to McKinsey and Bain, right? Usually when I become a kind of a management consultant, you go there, you're there for 3 to 5 years, you learn all the frameworks, and then you decide, do you go in-house, right? Go work at a big firm, or do you go get your MBA? So now we're taking these folks who are going to learn how to do GTM strategy agentically. right? And I am actually going to be measuring this with the university, with the Polsky Center and the Harry Davis Center. We were just talking about this on Friday. And I want to make a point to say we took very smart people that do the MBA route
Yeah.
and the McKinsey route and the Bain route, and they're going to come and work on a startup and do GTM very different than they've ever done. They don't even know the tools that I interviewed them on. And let's monitor that delight
Yeah.
and that productivity from June all the way to September. You have to get myopic to that level to state the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully you can, the MBA students I've seen try and make that leap often struggle when they hit the startup space because they think of things in terms of massive frameworks. And in fact, they think of things in terms of having to be in a framework versus being able to think and respond to what the concept in front of them is and how to deal with a complex system versus one that's very structured and moving at a very different pace than
absolutely. And when you look at go to market today, the entire stack is an AI stack in GTM. I mean, I know it because this is what I have deployed here. So as I was interviewing, I'm asking, like clearly smart, clearly critical thinker, clearly got curiosity and hunger. Now, let me ask you about the tools you use. It's like, do you know X? Do you know Y? What about this? And we have our stack is already 6 brands that we're using. Like, okay, that's the point, is all of that is foreign to you. And on the books, based on your CV, you're brilliant. So come on here and you're running a GTM strategy that's completely agentic. Let's see how we make you more AI enabled, because I heard this in November at the Insight Partners Scale Up AI Summit that they have every year. And the CTO of Mayo Clinic said he gets all the resistance all the time from the physicians. And this is the Mayo Clinic. And his response is a doctor with AI is going to displace a doctor without AI. It is not AI displacing the doctor. And that is what we are telling our physician population, which are, some of the smartest people to get through medical school and be there. It is true everywhere. In my example, as the MBA, second year students, they're coming here, they're smart, they got the frameworks from McKinsey and everywhere else. You got to put it into practice for GTM, right? And here's how you're going to do it. And so we hope to be publishing it in the fall as our little experiment on how we are affecting the labor force differently for a very well-respected population.
Well, as Dave was saying, I'm now going to ask us to wrap this up. So thank you very much, Susan. It's been fantastic information. And we like to wrap this up with 3 key points for our listeners to take away with them. And so on that note, I'll ask you, Susan, what would your favorite takeaway from this conversation be for our audience?
I love your question and kind of validation on fragmentation of data. It's just like the root canal that just never goes away, right? So recognize that recognize the things we're trying to solve. That is, point number 1. Number 2, that I like how in the conversation we highlighted, there will always be skeptics. And our jobs as automation architects, if you will, if that's what we're going to be looked at, right? And all the fear. I mean, in the end of the day, human beings always overblow the risk and underestimate the opportunity. It is a human thing. And recognize that that's what we're doing, right? So as naysayers, or as optimists, as realists, whatever you think you are doing or who you are, your profile, at the end of the day, there is a fine-tuning and sharpening of the pencil on what you really want to see and how are we getting there, and socializing that. It is not just, hey, we're here and then we're going to go to the moon tomorrow and we just don't know how we're going to get there, right? I think that's where a lot of the fear comes out, because then people are resistant. They don't know what to expect. They don't like to be, surprised. And there's a lot of risk. We're not risk takers and we overblow that component. I think it's important to recognize you're going to have naysayers, organize the response. I mentioned the KPI I want to measure, and be systemic about why I'm doing that and where I'm trying to go. And thirdly, that at the end of the day, when we do this well, that it isn't, we're solving all the world's problems. I think we're essentially, and I say this all the time, we're allowing human beings to, for the first time, think about applying high intelligence, high human intelligence that we have to bigger, more innovative ideas, which we never got to because we're so busy working at the grunt level of data. So of course, from my perspective, we're applying agentic AI very uniquely. We are not a chatbot, and every AI, company is doing something. But for the application on data and data work that is, difficult, and you ask anybody how they feel about their data, they will never tell you that they are joyful, right? And we apply and show that we've made a dent into that, and kind of the rewards back to society and to the cultures of the firms that we serve. You start to take that skeptic to be a believer, and they're seeing a path, and it's not as fearful and it's not, as scary. And then you're bringing more people onto the journey, and that is how you apply change, right? And kind of architect it in society in that way.
Awesome. Dave?
I'm only going to add one comment or one observation as we're going through. And Suzanne, I think you've really helped articulate something which is very easy to see in the news, as you said, that fear mongering is probably strong, but the fear that's generated by AI is coming here and what's going to happen.
Sure.
And what you've described is how it can work in the use cases that we've talked about, in the sense that these are really accelerators, and they empower people to do the interesting things.
Right.
When they're in a role where they're overloaded with lots and lots of demands on there. And so it starts opening up the possibility of interesting, new, more insights and learnings and so on that comes with that. So I think that one was it's almost a thread that's come through the whole thing of this. It isn't replacing my hands at the keyboard so much as making the time I spend at the keyboard more valuable, more interesting, more like generating more insights and learnings and so on.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, the optimism is great. I think it's the right way to look at how these tools empower us as we look forward at all of the different activities that we do in an organization. There is so much of that work that we just never have time to get to. So looking at AI as an accelerator to help us remove a lot of that grunt work to get to the interesting pieces that really help solve the big problems is definitely a massive enabler. With all of that said, I think it's been a fantastic conversation. So thank you so much for your time. And I think we'll wrap it up there for today. And people can reach out to us at feedback@definitelymaybeagile.com. And it's a pleasure as always. Thank you both.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
You've been listening to Definitely Maybe Agile, the podcast where your hosts, Peter Madison and David Sharrock, focus on the art and science of digital, agile, and DevOps at scale.